The known is the place you are when what you're doing produces the results you want. And I say want because that brings motivation and emotion into the game. So you're motivated to pursue something. You pursue it, and what you want happens. Not only do you get what you want, but you get validation for the structure that governs your perceptions and your actions. Now, if you imagine that you're lonely, and you approach a young woman in a social situation, attempting to make some contact with her, you want to alleviate your loneliness, and so you hope you make a good impression, and you tell a joke, let's say, in a relatively awkward manner, and you get rebuffed, then you feel you're no longer where you control. You're no longer where you exercise control. And that brings up all sorts of specters immediately. It's like, well, why when you get rebuffed, then you feel you're no longer where you control. You're no longer where you exercise control. And that brings up all sorts of specters immediately. It's like, well, why were you rebuffed? Well, maybe all women are to be despised. That's one theory. Maybe there's something deeply wrong with you. Maybe you're having an off day. Maybe it wasn't a very good joke. And so when you don't get what you want, then a landscape of questions emerge, and those questions can resonate through different levels of your identity, from the trivial, oh, I told the joke wrong, to the profound, there's nothing desirable about me and I'll be alone for the rest of my life. Now, you asked about identity, and I used the example of a child's game, but I could go through an identity. So I do this particularly in maps of meaning. And so, for example, let's say I'm sitting typing. Okay, we could decompose my identity. So at the highest level of resolution, I'm moving my fingers. And so that could be my identity. I'm the thing that moves its fingers. And then at a slightly broader level than that, I'm typing words. And at a broader level, I'm typing phrases and thinking them up, and then sentences, and then paragraphs, and then chapters, and then, let's say, full papers or books. That's a productive unit. So I'm the author of a book or the author of a paper. That's an identity. But then that's nested inside, for me, it would be nested inside being a clinical psychologist, being a professor, being a good citizen. And then that's nested inside something that's even broader than that. And I would say that that's nested inside a cultural heroism. And I don't mean that specific to me. I mean that for everyone. That's the outermost level, whether you're playing out the role of hero or adversary, say, that's the highest possible level of identity. That's the level at which fundamental morality is adjudicated. And there isn't really anything beyond. Outside that it's beyond us. It's the transcendent itself. And you're all of those at any one time. You're all of those levels of identity. But those are all practical, right? So those are the roles that you're playing in the world. All of those are a consequence of who you are. But in interplay, like in this situation with the child, all of that's negotiated with other people. And so if you have a functional identity, when you act it out in the world, then you get what you want and need. And if an identity doesn't do that, well, then you either retool your identity or you retool the world.
Your conception of the world?
Well, if you're retooling your conception of the world, then you're retooling yourself. No, you can actually, what a revolutionary does is try to bring the world into alignment with
literally
their
change
theory.
The world.
Yes, literally. Well, and we all do that to some degree because we are practical engineers, not only do we perceive the world, but we also interact with it so that it does manifest itself in accordance with our desires. There's limits, obviously, to how far you can go or how far you should go with that. And what are the limits? Well, there's practical limits. Nature won't do what you want it to unless you're very sophisticated in your application of your knowledge, and other people will object. So now you might say, well, you should forge forward regardless of their objection. And, there are circumstances under which that's true. But generally speaking, that's not a very good idea. It certainly doesn't make you popular as a child. And so that brings up one other issue. I would also say, and this, I developed this idea quite a bit in the new book. You go from egocentrism as a child, you have to go through this period where you're socialized as a child and adolescent. And that really means that you allow your identity to be molded and shaped by the group. And, you know, you think about how important peers, friends and peers are to children and adolescents. You know, your mother will say when you're a teenager, well, if Johnny jumped off the bridge, would you too? And you say, well, no. But the real answer is, well, probably. If all your friends are there taunting you, you would, in fact, jump off the bridge. And not only that, generally speaking, you should. Because it's your duty. It's your developmental duty as a child and a teenager to take your isolated self and turn it into a functioning social unit. Now, you could say, well, Peterson wants everybody to be a functional social unit, a robot, you know, a cog in the wheel. And I would say, well, that isn't where development stops. It has to go through that period before you can emerge as a genuine individual, which means you have to know the rules of the game before you can break them. But not being able to abide by the rules is not anything like being a genuine creative individual. Those are not the same thing. And there's plenty of attempt to confuse the two things, because it's much better, if you can't follow the rules, to view yourself as a avant-garde revolutionary than as a failure. And it's not like I don't know that social molding crushes. Obviously it crushes, and everyone feels that. These are existential problems. Everyone deals with the tyranny of culture and the fact that it does want you to be a certain way and not other ways, and those ways might not be in keeping with the deepest elements of your nature. Well, tough luck for you. Because you're also the beneficiary of culture. And so you have to offer it your pound of flesh. Now, you shouldn't do that at the expense of your soul, but you shouldn't stay an immature child either. And so this notion of identity that we're being fed is very, very, it's very thin.
What are we being fed? Be very specific.
Well, there is the idea, for example, that your identity is whatever you say it is, and that everyone else has to go along with that. No, that isn't how it works, partly because no one even knows how to go along with it.